I'd like to welcome each of you to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle, where each week we draw upon one of the topics from Still and Moving Center's Almanac. This week we take up the topic of the evolutionary tide. I feel that we are uniquely blessed with the presenter who's going to speak with us today. Evolution biologist and futurist, Dr. Elisabet Sahtouris, comes from the scientific spiritual tradition of the future, as she says. And she looks at that tradition from a sacred lens. She has served on the faculties of both Amherst and MIT. She currently teaches locally at Chaminade University. She's both a Greek and an American citizen, as well as a citizen of the future. So, Elisabet, we're so happy to have you. Take us away.
Aloha, talofa, everybody who's
Aloha.
That's talofa is another version of aloha, and so is aroha in New Zealand, Aotearoa. Anyway, it's lovely to be with you all today. And when I think about, well, let me first say, Renee sent me another quote by Helena Blavatsky from a different almanac, the Aquarian Almanac, I think it was called, that said, evolution is an eternal cycle of becoming, and nature never leaves an atom unused, meaning full employment in the universe. When I think of evolutionary tide, the first things that come to my mind is that I spent most of my life swimming against the tide. Because the big tide was what was happening in the world at large. And one of the indigenous names I was given during my 40 years of working with indigenous cultures is Atlanxali, which was given to me by a Mexica elder in Mexico. And it means sands of the seas. And I just love it because other indigenous names I have are a northern one of Crow Mother as a black bird and white condor in the South America, in the South American tradition, and the uniting of the two in the middle, Mexico, between North America and South America, as we name these continents, is Mexico, Mexico, in our usual parlance. And think of the sands of the seas as permeable boundaries, as shifting boundaries, boundaries that don't separate, but boundaries that connect. You can't separate the sand from the waves that wash over it. They get all mixed up. And sometimes the shore recedes, and sometimes the water comes higher. And all of us now in this tide of evolution have our eyes pretty much glued to the oceans because of the big things, the big changes that are happening there. But for me, what the tide of evolution is really about is what I've long called getting through a crisis of adolescence. And the crisis is in our dominant global economic political society, which is at the end of a 6,000 years, more or less, phase of top-down control and empire building. And that is almost over now. And I find it interesting how many PBS shows there are now about global explorations, showing Chinese who sailed around the globe in big ships before the Europeans did, but who went on, when they went all around Africa and places like that from China, they went there to establish diplomatic relations and trade relations, while when the Europeans went off across the oceans, they went as conquistadors, wanting to own the lands that they found and to plunder the resources, whether it was gold or the spices that they actually found, which were almost, they're worth their weight in gold. And anyway, the history of humanity is long, and 6,000 years is a relatively short time, therefore. And so this age of empire building, we see what's happening now, where we have the biggest nations fighting each other, right? Russia against the US or China, you know, they're still contending. They're still playing king of the hill. And they're still enveloped in hostilities to do this, to hold on to this economic political system that we know now is unsustainable. And the word, it's a wonderful word, unsustainable. It means cannot last. If it cannot last, we don't really have to do anything to bring it down. It will bring itself down. It is not sustainable. And our job is to work on the tide of evolution that takes us from things like fragmentation to wholeness. In all of the ancient traditions, it was understood that the universe and us within it were a whole. And in our culture, we were separated out. Indeed, the Western capitalist economy sacrificed community to the individual. Our focus was on the individual, while the Soviet Union was sacrificing the individual to community. And I used to say, if you could just put those two things together, and if you realize that we need both individuals and communities, then we could get somewhere. By the way, that Mashika elder, when she gave me that name, used to say, anyone who knows how to run a household knows how to run a world. Well, it's very interesting that the Greek word for, the ancient Greek word for household was ekos, spelled O-I-K-O-S. And from that word ecos, we get economy and ecology. And economy is ecos plus nomos, which is household plus rule, the rule of the household. And ecology is ecos plus logos, which is the organization of the household. And we separated economy from ecology, seeing them as separate things. I remember being at a President Clinton event in the 90s in Washington, and I actually got to speak for 3 minutes at the end of their last meeting. And they had argued about whether one had to talk about ecology in meetings that were really about economics. And I pointed out this Greek definition of the two and why you really couldn't separate them. And for me, the tide of evolution is showing that while this dominant culture made the ecology the servant of the economy, in other words, nature existed to be exploited for our economic purposes. And I realized that if you wanted an ecosophy, ecos plus Sophia or Sophos, the wisdom economy that we're heading for in this evolutionary tide, you had to turn that upside down and fit the economy into the ecology instead. I came to dislike the word environment because it was always part of this idea that nature is there to be exploited. It's something apart from us to take from. And we built this linear economy where you take and you consume what you can and the rest is tossed again, a linear waste economy, when nature never, ever, ever does anything. There's nothing recyclable in the natural world. Humans have invented molecules that don't decay in nature and that bacteria would break their teeth on, you know, if they were trying so hard to recycle it. So we end up with a linear waste economy in the dominant culture, and the evolutionary tide is pushing us to a circular economy where we make sure that everything we produce is recyclable. So it's going from arrogance to humility, And I studied 40 years with indigenous cultures and learned that profound humility in nature, to learn from nature and to copy it in our human ways, to recognize ecosystems that are highly competitive and ecosystems that are highly cooperative, and how, in my view, there's a learning progression from the one to the other, which biologists, ecologists still aren't recognizing. So we're going from not only arrogance to more humility, but and from fragmentation to wholeness, recognizing things like that in our political system, we see the Democrats and the Republicans in opposition to each other when nature is profoundly conservative with things that work well and radically changes things that don't work. And that's a 24/7 cooperative arrangement that you have to do both of, to protect what works, to change what doesn't. And we should all be allowed to volunteer. Are we protectionists or are we change agents? Which do we prefer? And to talk to each other, recognizing the wholeness, the unity of those two things. And we have this tension in nature always between the individual and the community, but we need both. We have separated them. So we want to move from hostilities to harmonies, from competition to cooperation, control to self-organization. We're recognizing that we don't have to bring down the big edifice, but we need to self-organize at our local community level and to link up all those communities while we still have an internet and can talk around the world and can exchange role models that are doing wonderful kinds of organization, but different in different cases. We don't want to impose one formula on the future. We want everybody to participate in the future, and for everyone to recognize, whether you like it or not, you're part of the future that's going to happen, because it happens through human behavior, through all of us together collectively. So I see this tide as the growing up, getting through the adolescent crisis, the maturing of the global family. If not the current global economy, it's not going to mature. It's going to, like the caterpillar, turn into a butterfly. And I love that metaphor because the caterpillar dissolves as the butterfly is building. And one of the big things that I learned in indigenous cultures was that we are matter, spirit, energy, all of us. I don't know if Kevin, if you have the keyboard slide, you could put it up, but it's not, I see you shaking your head, so probably you don't have it. And anyway, imagine this endless keyboard of vibrations, because both quantum science and standard physics model agree, kind of. The one thing they agree on is the universe is made of vibrations. So a keyboard is a series of vibrations from the dense low keys to the more ethereal high keys. Think of yourself as that whole keyboard. You are a body, mind, spirit, you're not a body with a mind. You're a body mind, and you're a body mind spirit. So in the keyboard, you go from matter to energy to pure consciousness to mind, to those things in the higher keys. And Western science, because it starts at the low end of matter, trying to grok the whole universe but decreeing that to be real, something has to be measurable. So their physical instruments break down in trying to measure the parts of you, like your dreams, your mind, your thoughts. They can't measure them with the physical instruments. The Eastern sciences start at the other end of the keyboard at cosmic consciousness, within which everything else forms. So they just slow the vibrations down. And when I talked about this once before in this group, I said, I love to see a UFO in the sky suddenly disappear because I love the idea that they are a civilization that can move up and down the keyboard, can be in the material form as a UFO, and then get out of the way by sliding into the higher, unmeasurable to us, vibrational part of their beingness, right? Because when they're visible to us, they're also subject to our weapons being fired at them. And I imagine, being on those UFOs and watching this culture that's on the edge once again of nuclear war. And they must have to exercise such restraint not to interfere, right? Because they know that we have to get over this, and they're rooting for us to get over this and to get with the evolutionary tide, so that, we can be mature living beings. I'm fascinated by the myth of human nature that's been imposed on us by the dominant culture. It's a myth that we are competitive beings, that that's our basic nature. And how they got this myth across when we live by the millions in city hives, cooperating all day long, is beyond, it's almost, once you see it, you find it really strange that they could convince us that our fundamental nature was to compete with each other when we're cooperating all day long, stopping at traffic lights, not bumping into each other, paying at the supermarket. I mean, you name it, what you're doing all day long is pretty cooperative, isn't it? So we have to end that kind of myth and write our own news stories and look to indigenous cultures that grew up long ago by being humble enough to learn from nature. So one of the things I love to talk to young people about is speaking truth to power. I am a reincarnationist, and I believe I had many lives in which I got into really bad trouble speaking truth to power. But learning to teach economics and politics through nature, especially through people's own bodies. No one can deny that they have 50 trillion highly cooperative cells. And that if, resources have to go to an injured part and you have to do it with a little less in your part of the body, there's no squawking about it, because there's this understanding of the body family, that everything has to thrive. See, we know these things at the family level, and we get it somewhat at community levels, but what the Mexica elder said, anyone who knows how to run a household knows how to run a world. That's the economy, ecology, right? Household, again, the household is holarchic. There are households within households within households. So we can, from what we know about keeping a family healthy, we actually can know what will keep a world economy healthy. So, Renee, have I used up TED Talk time by now? Probably so. So why don't we move into a Q&A or commentary section of this lovely group of people that's here with us today.
Yeah, wonderful. And I just love the fact that you've just presented this whole banquet of ideas for us all to partake of. This is a conversation circle. So any comment that is brought up, any questions that is brought up is really brought up to the whole group, with Elisabet here to just provide this enormous wealth of wisdom and experience that she brings with her. So I think I saw Diana's hand up first. Yeah.
I just love listening to you. I think you're marvelous, and it brings such hope and such feelings of common sense and understanding that I wish that we could broadcast all over. But my question is, I see that and hear what you're saying. What concrete steps do you suggest that we take? We can do it in our private life. We can do it here. How do we get this message out within a real, what could we do to get this more out? We can live it, but how do we continue to make this message known to a larger audience?
You know, I'm thinking about having been taken into a beautiful Amazon rainforest once by a lovely long-haired Indian and saying, "Can you teach me to talk to the plants and animals?" And he said, "Oh, shut up, Elisabet, and listen. That conversation's been going on as long as the forest has been here. It's your job not to initiate it, but to hear it, to listen."
Yeah.
And so if everything is conversation, you see, Diana, right? Everything is conversation. So the first step is having the conversations with people you know, and learning how to talk to people who don't agree with you politically, and practice finding what your common ground is. You know, I do this, I walk every day with someone who's on the opposite side of the political spectrum, but we discovered that we both care deeply about nature and for nature to thrive. You know, there's always a connection. And I believe that we need, as I said, the Democrats and the Republicans. So be the bridge, practice being a bridge. And then Kevin can post a list of places in the world where the local communities have really practiced self-organization with wonderful principles. Like in Sarvodaya in Sri Lanka, they teach the little children to meditate early on, to sit still and think about just two things: inner peace and generosity. Imagine building a whole culture of people who are peaceful and who think always about, what do I have to give to others?
Thank you.
You know, it's that simple. And you can, I'll put the role model communities around the world that you can look at, and you can see what in your community is working. Where can you go with a flow that, you know, people thinking about community, remind people how cooperative we are. It can change their lives just to see that, you know?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
David, hello.
Hello there. Hey, Elisabet. I totally agree with Diana. You're amazing to be with. And I did not know that you taught at Chaminade. I'm a student there. I have three things that I wrote down from your talk, and I'll list them and you can pick one if you like. First was, why were the Europeans so barbaric compared to the Chinese? Something we might learn from history about how to move forward. The second was, I was curious, and this is for the whole group, does anybody else have the feeling right now that they are personally going out of adolescence in some form? Because I certainly am, and I reflected just my personal evolution. Here, I'm almost 70 years old, and I feel like I'm coming out of adolescence. And I was curious if that was
great.
something common.
Okay, well, very good question about the Europeans.
Okay.
Most of the settlers that came over were oppressed people escaping oppression in a European dominator system. And we know from psychology that, you know, the victims often turn out to be the new oppressors. So that's one thing. Why the expeditions were funded to find gold and stuff like that suggests that the whole European culture was in very much this dominator mode, and this just the beginnings of industrialism that they needed to finance. And so they were after gold was a way of financing the things that were the whole industrial revolution, in fact, was financed by the silver, mostly by the silver plundered from the Peruvian Andes, from the mines there, and enslaving the people to do the mining for them. So there was the money chase was already going on there. Now, I'm not painting the ancient Chinese civilization as not having problems, but internally, they may have been oppressive with their own people at the same time that they were looking for equitable trade relations. You know, they wanted the same spices, let's say, but they wanted them, you know, they felt they had something to offer in turn. Question was about, can we be adolescents at any time? You bet. If you stop evolving, ugh. It would get, I get bored talking the same thing twice, right? Or teaching the same class twice. By the way, I'm not at Chaminade now because with COVID, they suspended the classes I was teaching. Are interesting because they were about living economies here in Hawaii. How could businesses of the future serve the people here well in sustainable ways? And I was blessed to be allowed to design these courses together with two Indigenous elders. Kumu Ramsey Tom is still around, and Kawila Clark sadly passed away. But the best part of that was working with them to design courses about Kuleana, responsibility, mine aina, who nurtures the land, the world, the nature. So I'm sorry they dropped these courses. I think they were too busy trying to meet the standards of standard MBA programs to recognize the importance of what we were doing. They never really promoted them.
Well, then the final note was, can we really know for certain that aliens have not already interfered?
No, oh, we know they have a little bit. They have deactivated missiles on occasion. And I just got back in touch with someone who actually invented the interceptor missile. And they used to ship him off across the Pacific Ocean to watch our missiles when they were lobbed across the Pacific. The missiles have to be renewed every certain number of years. So they fire blank missiles and then they send him across, or did at the time he was still working, to watch the oncoming missile as it came across the Pacific on radar. And he said several times he saw something circling the missile in a spiral as it came across the ocean. And he said, we have no such technology. We have nothing that could do that. So I think it's interesting that the government now wants to come out with more openness and more recognition of alien presence. I don't know what that's about. I hope it's not a prelude to a false flag invasion. If any of you hear about aliens invading us, it's a false flag. They're not hostile. If they can get here, they've grown up. And they probably, the cultures that didn't grow up probably blew themselves up. So that's why they're not here.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Robert Moore.
Yes, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I was thinking that it would be good if you spoke before Congress. You might be able to communicate with them. But I have a question. It's smaller indigenous communities often helped out in the environment. But now we have a massive world population. I wondered if you had any thoughts how humanity might now be beneficial to nature and help it instead of being destructive.
And can we open that to the whole group as well as Elizabeth, Robert? Because I bet we have a collective wealth
Of course,
answers
yeah.
potentially here. Yeah, okay. Elizabeth.
Oh, well, when I was a kid, shopping was about getting into my dad's Model T Ford panel truck, loading it up with veggies my mother had grown, and going from farm to farm in our neighborhood in the Hudson Valley, where one farm gave us honey and fruits and cider, and another farm gave us cow's milk, organic cow's milk from a cow dedicated to our family, so that the farmer always knew which cow was going to which kids in case anybody got sick. They were, health inspected twice a year. And another farm had chickens and eggs and so forth. And there wasn't money even exchanged. And every one of these farms was beneficial to nature, right? So I know in my own life experience, I'm 87, that humans have in my own lifetime, before World War II, there were no farm chemicals and only labor was required to make very abundant farms where everything not used was recycled, where there was no expense to the farmer other than the labor of his family and whoever he might hire to work on the farm. But there were no chemicals, so there was no financial expense in that sense. And it was all beneficial to nature. So it's not something hypothetical. We can certainly go back to that, but we must stop. Industrial agriculture created two problems from one solution. The solution was those farms that integrated the animals and the plants and fed each other. And when you separated animals and plants and raised both of them artificially, you created huge problems of piled up manure and having to feed toxic chemicals to plants and all that. So we need to look at our own economy, and these things will break down anyway. Climate change is going to severely reduce the population, I believe. And it's already doing that. It's already doing that. People are dying now in the storms and floods and things like that. So we have to look to how to become sustainable. All of our friends and families and descendants may get through that bottleneck if they're living in sustainable communities, but that's the order of the day: sustainable community that's beneficial to nature. Regenerative, one of the resources, I'm going to ask Kevin to post a list of places in the world where they're getting it right. And so you all will have a list that easily searchable names of different places around the world. Samantha, my dear, you are new here. I just met Samantha myself. She's an amazing young lady working through the East-West Center and Green Growth Hawaii. So welcome. Any comments?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And again, thank you for your time this week and again today. Maybe on that point, these ruminations have been in line serendipitously with some things that I'm doing in the work world. I found that when we're paying attention, right, we see these synergies and these, as my favorite word is serendipity, all across things, which just makes me feel like everything is much more connected, and someone is laughing at how it's all worked out. But I also, as Elisabet generously introduced to some of the work, I also work in strategic foresight. And I know I've been on a call before where I kind of mentioned this, but a really cool project that we're working on right now is Indonesia is moving its capital city from Jakarta to a new carbon neutral, sustainable, net zero city that is yet to be developed. So it's going to be in Borneo, in Indonesia, and the new capital is going to be called Nusantara. And so this is a really unique opportunity. Capitals don't move often, but Jakarta, for reasons of climate change and overpopulation and all of that, has realized that it's no longer sustainable for to be the hub of such a large island-based country. And so the government decided that it will move its economic center as well as its political center to a new place in the country as well. And so with this becomes a really, really interesting and curious opportunity of redesigning a city for hundreds of millions of people and what that will look like. And so right now it's the process has started, but it's not currently a developed place. So getting the opportunity to reimagine how we live in harmony with things around us, but also with each other, and the new social systems, the infrastructure we put in place, kind of the scaffolding of both society and all of the physical elements that support society has been a really curious undertaking. And to see that it's been an exercise more in imagination and return to nature than anything else has been nothing short of inspiring, and has been a really interesting, I think, example, as Elisabet, of what you're saying, and is very hope-giving as well, and that there are opportunities like this. Now, can every city move to a place that's currently underdeveloped and undertake this sort of initiative? Absolutely not. So it's finding what elements can also be applied in other places that has been, I think, the most fascinating exercise of all. of how do we redesign places to be more in line with what we know naturally, and to emulate this theory of, or this concept of biomimicry, which I've become much more interested in recently as well. So anyway, this has been feeding very much into how I'm thinking about all of that work that I'm doing, and the ways in which I hope to show up in those conversations, both personally and professionally in the weeks to come. So thank you, Elisabet, for your inspiration and your deep knowledge. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Samantha, for that. I too was all excited when I heard that Jakarta was going to be moved. And now I'm wondering, because first of all, it would be good for you to look at the example of what Brazil did when it moved its capital into the jungle. And one of the things that happened was people no longer got to go to the government. It was harder to do demonstrations before public buildings and stuff when your capital is far out in the jungle where you can't afford to travel. But there are more considerations. I was thrilled that Jakarta recognized its unsustainability because of its very low altitude, sea level. 13 of the biggest cities in the world are at sea level on coasts, and they will all be suffering from the rising tides and water tables and stuff. But whether it's, first of all, they're not going to move all the citizens. We know that. They will build big public buildings on land currently occupied by monkeys and many other species in the jungle on a rather large footprint because they're building a big city. And they won't move all the poor people. The people that will move with the infrastructure will be the people who can afford to do that. And that concerns me, that I think the poor people will just be left behind as the situation gets worse. So these are it's so hard sometimes to figure out the trade-offs. I'm very much in favor of cities. I've written a whole article called A Tale of Cells and Cities, that cities, if they have grown from villages, are natural entities, while nation states are not. Nations are lines scratched through cultures across land, and they hold, and they're the ones who can do the hostilities. Cities don't keep standing armies, not anymore, right? So I love global parliaments of mayors and things like that. I think it's very important that cities are talking to each other about sustainability. My friend Marilyn Hamilton has done wonderful things about how to transform whole cities from the inside as hives, as she calls them. So I'm for cities, but I'm a little bit worried that only the elite's going to get to move onto territory that's going to destroy quite a big chunk of the natural part of Indonesia and become more inaccessible as a capital. So I don't know. I don't have good answers to this. Jakarta knows it has to leave the coast. What do you do in the case like that is a very big question. And sorry that I forgot that you have been here before.
Other ideas in answer to the question of what do we do to, in our own lives, be working toward the more sustainable future, to be at the forefront, so shall we say, of the evolutionary tide?
Well, I think I would say we need a different kind of childhood for people. I'd like to put that in the mix. Children are so naturally, they can be naturally friendly, curious, energetic, and somewhere, and that adults will treat them kind of nicely for a few years, but maybe lose interest. And anyway, what I think we have to think a lot more about, how does a caring, happy human being emerge? over the first 18 years. So I think that means a lot of change in the education. I'm not for, oh yeah, so let's have them play more or do that, because one thing that we're not very good at, I think, in this country is developing minds. So at some point that has to be challenged, but I'm just thinking about how lovely it is when a child is curious, is happy. And that, I think, a lot depends upon, they don't have bear witness to domestic violence. They don't have bullying allowed at school. And that they have adventures. Take them all to Grand Canyon, or take them all out to, there's so little exposure to all the wonders, both of the nature that you're speaking of, but of the, you might say, the historical places. And children can be very curious about museums and all. So anyway, that would be the whole focus that I would insert into the conversation.
That's terrific. You're absolutely right, Carolyn, that how the children are educated is supremely important. I just watched a webinar indeed on Indigenous education, and it reminded me, I used to say, if you asked a group of third graders, would they rather stay in that school or go live with the Indians, that the school would empty out pretty fast. And so what's the lure? What is interesting about a third grader's visions of what it means to be an Indian? Well, first of all, it means to be outdoors, where you can run around instead of stuck behind a desk, and that you get to make things like bows and arrows or whatever, right? Pottery. So it's kind of what you're talking about, a more hands-on education that allows children to be creative from the beginning. And speaking of that creativity, that's the dominant culture right now, is really, really killing creativity in some very powerful ways. And I want to talk a little bit to that about artificial intelligence, which is very much on the agenda now, and everybody's learning to use ChatGPT. If you haven't heard of it yet, you will, within probably the next 24 hours, if you're at all online. To me, first of all, artificial intelligence is an oxymoron. I don't think humans can artificially invent something that outdoes natural intelligence. And one of the things appeals again about living with the Indians is that they know that they can talk to trees. They know that trees are intelligent, and all the animals are, and that they're having conversations, and that you can get into those conversations. They play on the whole keyboard. But this business of I just read an article by Peter Merry in England about the new artificial intelligence chatbots. In case you don't know what those are, you can write in a request for almost any kind of answers to questions. It's a huge research tool, and the biggest companies are now fighting to see who can capture more people to use their version of it. But you can answer all the questions on your history exam. One young man is bragging that he had the chatbot write all of the essays that got him into Berkeley. But what basically is happening is that the chatbot is giving you access to all of the stuff humans have already written and now painted and drawn and things that, because you can mess now with the art as well. And so you can get the chatbot to compose essays on anything you want. What you don't know is that it too is run by algorithms so that it will steer you to certain parts of the collected writings of humanity. But look at what it means to have access to the collected writings of humanity. It means that everything you're going to get is in the past. There is no creativity. It is not about building your future together through conversations with other people, inventing new ideas, new ways of doing things in your locale that fits your environment and your people. No creativity whatsoever. It's all canned, and it's canned from stuff that was already done in the past by a culture that we know now to be unsustainable. So watch out, be careful. While, you know, you may find something useful in it that works for you now. I remember back when there was no internet, no fax machines, and you had to go to dusty bookstores and libraries and hunt through card catalogs, but it was like solving mysteries to get answers to questions. It challenged your mind. You didn't just ask a question and then sit there while the machine ground out the lengthy, detailed answer that you needed for your homework. You had to use your mind and your creativity. So be really careful about whether it's a good idea to turn, you know, to make robots smarter than people. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I don't think there's any way humans can exceed the intelligence of nature, including the intelligence of your own body, your own cells, your own gut bacteria. You know, bacteria invented electric motors billions of years ago. They invented the first World Wide Web to talk to each other billions of years ago. They were incredibly creative and still are, and they live in your guts, 10 times as many as your cells. You know, go for the creativity and the new. Stop regurgitating the canned old. Oh, here's my friend, Doc Tusi. Did you just get here? Take your mute button off and say hello.
Aloha. Sorry, I was on another Zoom.
Dr. Tusi, we're so glad to have you. Elisabet told me a little bit about you before we began this Zoom, and I understand you're recently retired from UH and you gifted UH rather than the other way. So I would say you are certainly on the vanguard of the future, which is a question that we're entertaining right now. What can each of us do in order to be on the forefront of the evolutionary tide? This year for Still and Moving Center, which is sponsoring this conversation, is the year of Citizens of the Future. So we're talking about what we can do to move forward. And one of the most recent comments just made was that we need to create different childhood experiences for people to go through so that when they emerge as adults, that we have more happy, caring, and forward-looking, creative human beings that are moving into our future.
Wow. Just some thoughts. Sorry I came in a bit late, but we speak often with our young and with our wisdom elders regarding the future and what is essential to pass on and to nurture amongst our young. There are many topics, but the one that was distilled down is to teach our young the difference in between curing and healing. The curing is to remove all evidence of the disease. You got a broken arm, you can cure it and remove all evidence that it was broken. Healing is to make whole again. So you can cure, but not be healed. In the same token, when we engage our technologies and our methodology and our actions, the propensity is towards curing or fixing something versus healing something. And if we look at the Western paradigms of Western science, where the machine paradigm basically is the foundation for modern science, it is no accident that the lexicon that is used. Let me give you an example. I just came out of the hospital last Friday, and one of the doctors came in and said, let's see what the problem is and if we can fix it. So even the language is already incorporated in much in which we are unconsciously, we just go through it because of this very deep-rooted paradigm. So we have a tendency of looking to fixing problems as if the universe was made out of is a machine. But in our world, our fundamental root beliefs is in the spirituality of a living consciousness of the earth, and that we are part of it, rather than the whole, focusing on the whole that makes up, or focusing on the parts that make up the whole. We are taught that we focus on the whole that organizes the parts. So we see things very differently, and yet are perplexed when we are told that that is an unscientific way of looking at things. So I think we need to create an image in our children about the future and how they can contribute towards, not necessarily it's fixing, but it's healing. And that the images we need to conjure in their little minds is not of a mechanic, but of a gardener. Sorry, just some thoughts I sort of just came to me.
Oh, please don't apologize. It's really beautiful to have children come out not seeing us as fixing our future as a mechanic would. And there must be so many worries when children look at all the dire and dour predictions of what's happening in our environment, in our ecology. And instead to see ourselves as the good gardeners that are able to heal and make whole. And just being reminded by Elisabet at age 87 that she herself lived at a time when there was no such thing, for example, as chemicals on the farms. That it was all the labor of the family that went into it. And that means that what we've done in terms of industrializing agriculture is something, it seems to me, that is healable, because it was such relatively short time ago that we moved away from that more holistic model of how to grow our own food and take care of our land. Other
Yeah.
thoughts from people who might not have spoken yet? I'd love to hear, for example, from Debbie and Z and Billy, maybe Donna. Both my parents here, Nancy and Ray. And Roger's on the other end of the line. I see Mary and Diana, all sorts of folks. Your vision of what we can do towards this evolutionary tide moving in a helpful, positive direction. How can we help?
I think a couple of things. One, Elisabet said something nice about how you got to go with both sides of the discussion between Republicans and Democrats. And I think we got to go with both sides of technology. Technology's here. It's not going anywhere. Chatbots are going to get even more effective, utilized. I don't think it necessarily has to cut down on creativity. Maybe it'll free us up to do the more creative things while the chatbots do the rote kind of things. So I just want to throw that out, and you could go into many contexts there. Let's recognize where we are and what we got to deal with, and at the same time, recognize that the technology does help and it needs to be managed better. The other thing I think is what we can do.
I love that you're, kind of looking at another point of view from one of your best friends. I think that kind of dialogue is so dynamic and important for us to be able to have, and know that, we're still all friends and we can take other points of view. You're manifesting, I think, right here and right now, this idea of two different sides, so to speak, having a conversation. So thank you for instantiating that just as you speak right now, and please go on.
So the thing I think we can most do, as I look at where we are and what we have, is there's only two things you have to create things: time and money. And money's fungible, so that the more you put in, the less it becomes worth. And so you're never satiated. It's like all the material world. But an hour worth of your time is an hour worth of your time. And as people get older, and the beauty of our example here of my sister, Miss Sahtouris, at 87, couldn't be, well, she could be, but it'd be hard to be more articulate than she is. Whereas they set Social Security at 65 because people didn't live much longer some years ago. So we have a huge amount of talent of elder people who are living longer, who have all this wisdom, and we need to combine it with the youth that has their life in front of them and the energy to do certain things. And I would say, let's look for ways that we can volunteer everywhere. There was a program years ago at the Queen's Hospital, was presented from some New Zealanders when I was on their board. And in New Zealand, they had seniors go into classrooms with kids and just sort of be their friend and help, either one-on-one or a couple of kids, but you had seniors right there with them, supporting them in what was going on. And she said something else about collaboration versus competition. There's an old story about a Hawaiian elementary school, and a teacher's giving an exam, and she goes back and she says, well, you three kids were talking back here. And the Hawaiian boy said, well, Sarah didn't know the answer to the question, so we had to help her. So I think, isn't that the goal, that we all gain knowledge, we all get more sophisticated rather than competing with each other? So I got a number of thoughts in there, but I really think volunteerism is the answer. We could volunteer for everything from the schools to city, where you get your driver's license. Wouldn't it be nice if there were 5 extra people there and you didn't have to stand in line for 4 hours?
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at our time, and what I'm going to do is let you know what's going on in the next few weeks here at Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, while I let one of you think about how you might give a vote of thanks. It's always a kind of a volunteer job that somebody takes up. To Elisabet, who would like to give her a vote of thanks, while I let you know about our future upcoming meetings. And then anybody who wants to stay online a little bit longer and have a little more of a chat will remain here, but we do want to be kind of concise about our ending time. So we have just finished the Evolutionary Tide, and I think that's going to lead really beautifully into April 1st, no joke, is going to be our collective spiritual odyssey, And whereas Elisabet was speaking to us from the scientific spiritual tradition of the future, this is going to be from the theosophical tradition, which I might characterize itself as the spiritual, scientific, philosophical tradition of past, present, and future. The following week, we're going to look at the cycle of the phoenix, which is also, one of those things that goes around. And the following week, on April 15th, we'll look at our mental posture. And we may be having someone who's speaking of that from the yoga tradition that is usually we think of as taking up physical postures, but what about the mental posture? So do I have somebody who'd like to give a vote of thanks to Elisabet for her presentation and commentary during our conversation today?
I'll be happy to. Elisabet, you're amazing, as everyone has pointed out, and you're such a contribution to this circle. What a blessing it is for us to have you amongst us now on a regular basis. And I so appreciate your perspective and your long history of work on the topic so dear to us here in the circle. So from all of us, thank you so very, very much.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Diana, did you want to mention something as well?
He
Okay.
covered it. I think I really appreciate the hope and the, when I hear you speak, it gives me hope. And sometimes with all the news and things that are going on, it feels like we each do our own part through whatever that we do, but to hear the hope for the world and to hear, and I'd love to see that list that you have being sent out, and just, I really appreciate that viewpoint. So thank you. You are a gift.
Oh, thank you so much, Diana. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, second time, third time, wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for attending. We'll love to see you again in the future. I really think that next week's conversation on the our collective spiritual odyssey is going to be just a perfect follow-up to where Elisabet has launched us. And it will look into the past as we then project further into the future, to look at what we're doing as humanity moving along. Because so many times when we're looking at evolution, we're looking at it from such a physical standpoint. And so instead to be looking at it from a spiritual standpoint, which I think Doc Tusi was what you were pointing to as the wisdom that's coming from your tradition that you want to pass on, is to look at things, what's really going on the spiritual level, and how do we move that forward? For example, with healing, not just curing. Beautiful. Mary, did you have anything you wanted to add in possibly? Mary's comes to us both from the Catholic tradition and also as someone who is part of the Hawaiian tradition.
Thank you. Not really, but I just, when Elisabet was speaking, thank you, Elisabet. I was thinking about the Hawaiian tradition of the land is here, not for humans, but humans are here for the land.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to circle back around to point number 2 that Elisabet, I may have misspoke. I was curious because for me personally, yes, I've been an adolescent my whole life, but it does feel like recently in the last few years, perhaps in accordance or in concordance with what you're mentioning about the race coming through adolescence. I was curious if there were other members of the group that were also feeling some sort of evolutionary urge going on within them personally, because it's certainly true for me. If it was something that maybe the culture itself is feeling at a personal level.
Well, yes, is that a question? Whether we're feeling this evolutionary impulse as individuals?
Yes, yeah, it was
absolutely. Yes, and I think that's exactly what happens. I mean, how does the caterpillar turn into a butterfly? Is there not something going on at the cellular level inside that chrysalis, right? There's an evolutionary impulse there that all of these, what are actually called imaginal cells, that the equivalent biologically is stem cells. They have been tucked into the folds of the skin of the caterpillar all the caterpillar's life. and suddenly they emerge in the chrysalis. They come away from the folded skin of the caterpillar within the caterpillar, and these stem cells turn into all the creative entities that can build the new body of the butterfly. So they're feeling an evolutionary impulse as soon as the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis. And in some ways, the COVID years put us into a chrysalis, didn't they? And I think many people actually felt an evolutionary urge when they saw things like the rapid ways in which nature recovered as soon as the humans were locked up, and the skies cleared of pollution when the airplanes stopped flying. So those, and also something that happened was we suddenly elevated caregivers to heroic status, which had never happened before. So these are the positive results of what happened to us. And I think a lot of people felt that evolutionary impulse.
I've been feeling for a long time like our society was stuck at adolescence, and that we're moving into something more. I'd point to, in a spiritual basis, just the word spirituality, which didn't exist years ago. It was all about religion. And Joseph Campbell's work in the late 80s. So talking about all our creation stories and our living stories are stories, and they're meant to tell us how to live. They're not meant to be awestruck. And you look at humans just a few hundred years ago, when you were killed if you said the wrong word or you didn't comply with the religion. And so some of that is still going on, and there's some backlash, but I think the backlash to evangelism, or not evangelism so much as hypocritical evangelism. I mean, whatever you believe is fine, but if you do it, then if you do it as an authoritarian to get everybody else to do it, now you're living as a teenager, as opposed to being your own full young adult. And I just think if you look at, of course, it moves really slow when you're talking hundreds of years, and it may take us quite a while to get there. But I think the indigenous knowledge, the roots of the religion, the stories are really real, and we may get to a point where we're treating them that way and acting on them properly instead of just giving lip service to it. So, to me, I've been feeling that, and it is very encouraging, I think.
Anything, Roger, personally to you, something evolutionary within yourself personally? I mean, I get the concept generally.
Well, I have begun to feel that I'm capable of exhibiting and living some of the truths that I've been reading about and trying to practice for years. And I it's hard. I just see myself, and maybe I think it's partly a function of getting older, is to maybe that's it, grow up and be more in touch with the universal energy and feel like I can communicate with it and connect with it, and not be such a teenager, if you will, where I'm just learning about it. Now I'm beginning to practice it in a meaningful way, David. That to me feels good personally. He's allowing me to do that too, where it wouldn't 30, 40 years ago.
I want to add a little postscript here on a word I like is co-opetition, and it's the unification of competition and cooperation. You know, when the Greeks invented the Olympics, the purpose of people competing with each other was to drive excellence. And so it wasn't about one guy wins and the other guy loses. It was about how do you drive excellence by pitting people against each other through sports. And when I was in China in when was it? Late 70s. I was taken to a basketball game, and my host was sitting next to me. And when the first basket was made, he leaped up and cheered. So I knew which team he was rooting for. And I asked him something about which team was his. And oh, I know what, no, he had gotten up again when the second basket was made. It was made by the other team. And that confused me, that he had cheered for both of them. So I asked him, which team is yours, through the interpreter? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, which team do you want to win? And he said, how do I know which one will win? and they were cheering for excellence. And I thought, oh my goodness, what if you went to a school that was having a basketball game or a football game or whatever else, and you said nothing to the coach, nothing to the players on either team, but you talked to the audience before the game, the parents and friends, right? And you said, tonight we're going to cheer excellence. You're going to cheer for points made by both teams throughout the game. And at the end of the game, we're going to ask the team that made the most points to give a party to the other team to thank them for driving them to the extra excellence. Everything would shift, right? Why can't we do that in schools right away with children to teach them that there is such a thing as friendly competition? Now, we don't have to get rid of all competition, right? In fact, it would be a mistake to get rid of all of it, because we need to drive each other to more and more excellence, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm so glad to see this similar message coming through the TV show Ted Lasso. It may be one of the #1 shows right now, and they just had the cast visiting the president because, well, it's all about mental health, but it's also all about doing what's right. And so one of the coaches goes off to another team, but Ted Lasso says, well, I hope he does really well. So it's really about that shifting the notion of competition to we're all striving to do the best, and sports, of course, is the perfect metaphor for doing that. And if we could somehow learn to be gardeners and sports coaches, that might transform society.
We also absolutely need sports to deal with testosterone, right? Which can be the most dangerous substance on earth if not channeled.
You know,
I don't know whether this qualifies as feeling like an adolescent. All I know is that one of the most pathetic characters I remember from the movies was the uncle of Napoleon Dynamite, who kept trying to relive when he was probably about 40, his, winning pass in his senior high school football game. And I always feel like, oh my gosh, I would never want to move even a day backward in time. There are just too many things that I know, I understand, that I appreciated over all these things I've learned over all this time. I only want to move forward. I can't imagine wanting to go back and not know or understand what I do right now. Does that qualify?
Well, Renee, for many men in a culture which has no maturation rituals for men other than putting them, say, in the military. And so many men have their first experience of community in the military, where they're on teams where people have each other's backs and things like that. So I understand why people who come out of the military and aren't, shell-shocked, traumatized, would reflect back on that as a positive experience.
Yeah.
We need, as Tusi knows, Doc Tusi knows very well, maturation rituals that put men into service to their communities. Want to talk a little bit about that, Tusi?
Team sports, as well as scouting, also address that.
Rituals that have been able to survive the millenniums, particularly in Samoan, is the ritual tattooing of men and of women, from the knees all the way up to the middle of the chest. So when the first explorers arrived, they assumed that people were running around in black pants, but they were tattoos. We are also a warrior people, so everybody presumed it was associated with competition, with masculinity, warrior attributes, etc. But when you understand its full purpose is to enable you to realize levels of pain so great that it actually changes color in your imagination. But it forces you to a point where you have to think of, I can stop the pain now and quit. But in our culture, to quit is to malign the future and the past forever. Or you can willingly give up your life to preserve the honor and dignity and love of your family. And when you reach that point, and you choose to defy death for the benefit of the greater whole, an amazing phenomena occurs where it feels like someone's poured warm water over you. And then that will alter your life and rededicate your energies towards service, towards care, and the most fundamental core virtue is aloha, love. So this very masculine, horrific practice is actually a ritual towards testing the mettle and the spirit of anybody. But the goal is to enable you to realize that higher transcendent level of caring for those things that are greater for yourself, to dedicating and committing your life towards its integrity, towards its dignity, and towards its sacredness. It's life-altering. So people who don't understand that will see me if I wear my shorts or others in tattoo and think, well, that must be one bad dude. And I said, no, actually, that's one hell of a good dude.
Thank you so much, Doc. That was transformational to hear that. Thank you.
I actually am thinking about so many of our young people who have turned to self-harm. And I think that it's been analyzed as arising from experiencing so much, psychological pain that it somehow feels relieving to go through this physical pain of this self-harm. And yet I wonder if maybe there is something actually really archetypal that these young people are experiencing internally. And since they are not going through these maturation rituals in a very healthy and uplifting way, they're falling into these other practices, trying to take care of themselves. I mean, it's evidently some sort of effort at self-healing, but it seems to have gone awry. But there has very traditionally been in cultures throughout the world these ceremonial processes that do have us face tremendous, like putting the hooks in the skin and, being connected on a thong to some high pole during sun rituals in some of the North American dancing traditions, for example. Just things that just seem, really, you're going to do that on purpose? But maybe there is something when it's done within the right context of a whole community that is actually uplifting. And yes, it does probably relieve some psychological pain, and it lifts us into a higher sphere that, like you're saying, would allow us to rededicate our energies if we willingly went through such a thing ourselves
Mhm.
within that sacred context.
Yeah, I think Terence McKenna spoke about this in a book he called Archaic Revival, that the human race has, led itself into this dead end, and we're looking for ways to go back to a time that made sense for humans when we were in balance with nature. And this, the tattooings and the piercings and the things that are coming out in modern culture are that impulse to go back to something that made sense.
I would say it's not, and this, we should probably close out with this. It's not about going back. It's about recognizing that Indigenous people went through the maturation process, both on that individual level of having, maturation ceremony that's pushes you to your pain limits, but that they did it. They got through to the mature way of being on the earth, with the earth, as humble beings within nature, learning from nature, when we have been now dominated by a culture that's very youthful and arrogant and thinks it knows better than nature. So thank Providence, God, whatever you call the higher power, that we still have Indigenous people like Doc Tusi and his son, who went through the same ritual and who is my role model man. I started out the talk saying we need both the protectors and the change agents, and he's my role model male protector within the military, and a very, very peace-loving, peace-intentional man. So we still have these role models around the world. We're not going to go back and live without technology. We're going to learn how they relate to nature, how, when I see the UFOs, I can't be against technology, because obviously those UFOs are very high tech, right? But they're built by a culture that understood its spiritual, played the whole keyboard of matter, energy, spirit, and that's why they can move into the spiritual realm where we can't see them, so that we can't shoot them down. But they are the ones who played the whole keyboard, who understood themselves as matter, energy, spirit beings, and who understood the fundamental nature of consciousness in all life. As Dr. Tusi was just talking, all our life and know it's smart, right, inside. So we have the role model still. We need the creativity. Our technology must become sustainable. We just can't allow ourselves to build anything that isn't recyclable. We know what to do. We know what to do. And how much of technology we can take through the bottleneck is, we'll see. How good will we be at making it clean, green, and recyclable so that we can keep it into the future?
If I could add, I truly believe we can heal with our humanity what we cannot cure with our science. The technologies, I think, will be what they are. The key to their engagement will be rooted in the values behind it. Let me give you an example with what was inculcated through the tattooing process were 4 fundamental wisdoms that have guided my life, and many other Samoans went through the ritual in the same way. They teach you engaging with humility, embracing with respect, sustaining with aloha, and healing with forgiveness. Those are over 2,000 years old of values that have been passed on. Until there are values associated and taught, then we are creating an environment in which knowledge can easily outrun wisdom. And it's not the children's fault. We ask ourselves, the only reason we got to where we are at was because our elders were present. And they are our sacred living treasures. And when they are not embraced in that manner, I found it very, very distressing when I went to visit a friend and said, where are your elders, your grandparents? And they said they're in a home. And I said, you don't live together? Oh, they're over there. Well, anyway, my point is, you're having an entire generations of children being raised in the absence of their elders, their grandparents. They're being raised in, what do you call these places? Daycare centers? And then that's not where they learn wisdom and values. They don't learn the fundamental foundations of who they are as human beings on this earth. And yet we are going to put them in charge of developing and implementing and applying the technologies of tomorrow. Then rest assured, be prepared for more of the same, if not worse.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Ducey, could I ask you to repeat, and so that I can record those 5?
Yeah, actually, they're called tofa, T-O-F-A. Tofa, plural, but tofa means wisdoms. So the 4 wisdoms are, the first is in all that you do, engage with humility, followed by embracing with respect, followed by sustaining with aloha, with love. 4th, by healing with forgiveness. And the 5th, which I didn't mention, deals with leadership, that good leaders lead, but great leaders heal.
Wow. Words to live by.
I do.
Yay, yeah.
So marvelous. We're so glad that you joined us. Tusi, thank you for joining. Elisabet, I'm not sure how I should address you, but many, many thanks. And Elisabet for just bringing such a wealth of things for us to consider into our futures. I'm so glad that we have the wisdom of elders that, you know, can lead the way forward. And we did have some of the younger folks here as well.
Yes.
That's important too.
Good.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Roger, for joining us, Sharon for being here, and Billy, we're glad you're here too. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha, mahalo.